Mr. Chairman, I object to this witness testifying before Congress. Dan Bongino is nothing more than an unqualified right-wing propagandist who peddles conspiracy theories for profit. He's a former cop with zero credibility on matters of congressional ethics and financial transparency. I move that he be dismissed immediately. Those were the words Nancy Pelosi used to attack Dan Bongino on live television during a congressional hearing. The 84-year-old Speaker Emerita, worth $264 million after 37 years of public service, thought she could destroy another critic with a dismissive insult. She thought wrong. Because what Pelosi didn't know was that Bongino had spent 6 months building a forensic case against her using the exact same investigative techniques he'd learned hunting financial criminals in the Secret Service. Every stock trade, every suspicious timing, every dollar of her impossible wealth accumulation, all compiled into one devastating folder. Her attack gave him the opening to unleash it all. Destroy that like button, because you're about to witness the most stunning reversal in congressional history. A former federal agent is about to systematically dismantle the Queen of Congress using nothing but official documents, public records, and cold forensic analysis. This isn't about Democrat versus Republican. This is about a political aristocrat who's amassed a $264 million fortune on a $223,500 salary, while her husband's stock trades outperform Wall Street hedge funds. This is about insider trading. This is about corruption. This is about accountability. Nancy Pelosi tried to silence Dan Bongino. Instead, she just gave him the microphone to expose everything. The House Financial Services Committee hearing room was packed beyond capacity. Every seat filled with journalists, activists, congressional staffers, and curious members of the public who'd lined up since 6 a.m. for the chance to witness what had been billed as a contentious session on congressional ethics and financial transparency in the modern era. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. A hearing about congressional ethics, chaired by a committee that included some of the wealthiest and most actively trading members of Congress. It was like asking foxes to investigate henhouse security. At 10:15 a.m. on this Wednesday morning in Washington, D.C., Dan Bongino sat at the witness table, a glass of water before him, his hands folded calmly on the polished wood surface. He wore a dark navy suit, white shirt, red tie, the uniform of someone who took congressional testimony seriously. His background as NYPD officer and Secret Service agent had taught him that presentation mattered, that credibility was built through professionalism. The committee room's ornate architecture, high ceilings, marble columns, American flags flanking the raised dais where members sat carried the weight of democratic deliberation. C-SPAN cameras positioned strategically throughout captured every angle. Cable news networks broadcast live. This was supposed to be routine testimony about government accountability and fraud prevention. Chairman Patrick McHenry, the Republican from North Carolina, gavelled the hearing to order at 10:18 a.m. The committee will come to order. Today we examine issues of financial transparency and ethical standards in congressional conduct. Our first witness is Mr. Daniel Bongino, former Secret Service Special Agent and current analyst on government accountability. Mr. Bongino, you're recognized for your opening statement. Bongino leaned toward the microphone, his New York accent immediately recognizable. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Waters, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My testimony draws on 12 years of federal law enforcement experience, including extensive work investigating financial fraud, money laundering schemes, and corruption at the highest levels of government. He'd spoken perhaps 90 seconds, outlining his credentials and the basics of financial fraud detection, when the doors at the back of the chamber opened with more force than necessary. Nancy Pelosi entered. The effect was immediate and calculated. At 84 years old, Pelosi had perfected the art of making an entrance. She wore a deep purple suit with a statement necklace of pearls, her silver hair styled with precision. Every camera in the room pivoted to capture her arrival. Journalists in the gallery leaned forward. Even committee members turned to watch. She walked with purpose down the center aisle, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She didn't hurry, didn't acknowledge the disruption her late arrival caused. This was her house. She'd been Speaker twice, served 37 years, was arguably the most powerful Democrat of the 21st century. She entered when she wanted to enter. Pelosi took a seat 3 chairs down from ranking member Maxine Waters, in a position that would keep her prominently in frame for the cameras. She arranged papers before her, adjusted her microphone, then leaned to whisper something to the member beside her. A slight smile played at her lips. Bongino, demonstrating the discipline learned from years of standing, continued his testimony without missing a beat. In my experience investigating fraud schemes, certain patterns emerge consistently. Suspicious timing of financial transactions, wealth accumulation that cannot be explained by documented income sources, the use of proxies or shell entities to obscure the true beneficiary of transactions. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Pelosi's voice cut through the room with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Chairman McHenry looked up clearly, not expecting this. The gentlelady from California is recognized. Pelosi adjusted her microphone with a practiced motion, then fixed her gaze not on the chairman, but directly at Bongino. When she spoke, her voice carried both dismissiveness and contempt. Mr. Chairman, I object to this witness testifying before Congress. Dan Bongino is nothing more than an unqualified right-wing propagandist who peddles conspiracy theories for profit. He's a former cop with zero credibility on matters of congressional ethics and financial transparency. I move that he be dismissed immediately. The room erupted. Republican members began objecting simultaneously. Democrats shifted in their seats, some looking uncomfortable with Pelosi's aggressive approach. The gallery buzzed with conversation. Chairman McHenry's gavel came down repeatedly. But Pelosi wasn't finished. She leaned further into her microphone, her voice rising slightly. This man makes money spreading lies about Democratic members of Congress. He has no expertise in ethics or financial regulations. He's a right-wing media personality masquerading as an expert. His presence here is an insult to this committee and to the American people. The cameras captured it all. Pelosi's aggressive posture, the pointed finger she directed at Bongino, the satisfied expression that suggested she believed she'd just delivered a fatal blow to his credibility. What the cameras also captured was Dan Bongino's reaction, or rather his lack of reaction. He sat perfectly still. No anger flushed his face. No defensive posture tensed his shoulders. Instead, for exactly 5 seconds, long enough for every camera to zoom in for the moment to hang suspended in the chamber, he displayed the slightest smile. Not smug, not angry. The smile of someone watching an opponent walk directly into a meticulously prepared trap. The room gradually quieted, waiting to see how this would unfold. Chairman McHenry looked uncertain. Ranking Member Waters appeared to be considering whether to support Pelosi's motion. The other committee members watched with the wariness of people sensing they were about to witness something significant. Dan Bongino took a slow sip of water, set down the glass with careful precision. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly throughout the chamber with unmistakable authority. Mrs. Speaker, thank you for those comments. The use of her former title was deliberate, respectful, but also pointed. Everyone in the room knew Pelosi was no longer Speaker, but still carried immense power. Since you've chosen to question my credibility on national television, Bongino continued, his tone remaining calm, let me respond directly to your concerns about qualifications and expertise. He reached down beside his chair. Every eye in the chamber followed the movement. When his hand emerged, it held a folder. Not a thin manila folder, a massive overstuffed accordion folder, easily 4 inches thick, bulging with documents tabs, marking different sections in multiple colors. It landed on the table before him with a thump that echoed through the silent chamber. "Let me establish my qualifications, Mrs. Speaker," Bongino said, his voice taking on the methodical tone of a detective presenting evidence. "I spent 12 years in the United States Secret Service. I protected President Barack Obama with my life. I investigated financial crimes, including money laundering, wire fraud, and insider trading schemes. I was awarded by the Department of Justice for successful prosecution of white-collar criminals. I taught criminal investigative methods at the Secret Service Training Center." He paused, letting that sink in. "Does that sound unqualified to you?" Pelosi's expression flickered just for a moment from confident to uncertain. "But since you've decided to make this personal..." Bongino continued, opening the massive folder to reveal hundreds of pages of documents, printouts, highlighted sections, sticky notes. "Let me ask you some questions, Mrs. Speaker." He extracted the first document, what appeared to be an official government form. "You've served in Congress for 37 years. Your annual salary is $223,500. That's $8.3 million in total congressional compensation over your career. Before taxes, before living expenses, before anything else." He looked up, making direct eye contact with Pelosi across the room. "Yet according to the most recent financial disclosures and independent analyses, your net worth is $264 million. That's interesting mathematics, Mrs. Speaker." The room fell into absolute silence. "So let me ask," Bongino said, his voice hardening slightly, "shall we discuss your financial transparency? Shall we discuss how you accumulated $264 million on a government salary? Shall we discuss your husband's remarkably well-timed stock trades, the NVIDIA options purchased weeks before the CHIPS Act vote, the Visa shares dumped months before the Department of Justice lawsuit, the portfolio that outperforms professional hedge funds year after year?" He arranged more documents before him, creating a visual display of the evidence he'd compiled. "Or should we discuss your lifestyle, the $50 million real estate portfolio, the Napa Valley Vineyard, the $24,000 refrigerator you showed off during the pandemic while small businesses closed, the private hair salon appointment while Americans were locked down?" Each question landed like a hammer blow. Pelosi's face had gone from confident to pale. She opened her mouth as if to interrupt, but no words came out. Chairman McHenry, recognizing that something extraordinary was unfolding, made a decision. The witness was directly attacked by the gentlelady from California. He has the right to respond to challenges to his credibility. "Mr. Bongino, you may proceed." Bongino's smile widened fractionally. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the American people deserve to hear some facts about how their elected representatives accumulate wealth while in office." He pulled out a thick stack of papers, held together with a binder clip. "Mrs. Speaker, I've spent 6 months conducting the same kind of forensic financial analysis I used to do in the Secret Service. Looking at patterns, examining timing, following the money. And what I found should concern every American who wonders why their government doesn't work for them." Nancy Pelosi sat frozen in her seat, the confident power player who'd entered late to destroy another critic, now realizing she'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. She'd attacked someone who came prepared, someone with evidence, someone with training, someone who wasn't afraid of her. "Let's start with something simple," Bongino said, organizing his documents with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. "Let's start with the Pelosi portfolio." Dan Bongino arranged a series of documents across the witness table in chronological order, each one bearing official government seals or financial institution letterheads. The cameras zoomed in, capturing pages filled with numbers, dates, transaction records. "Mrs. Speaker, let's discuss wealth accumulation." Bongino began, his voice taking on the tone of a forensic accountant presenting findings. You've served in Congress since June 1987. That's 37 years of what you call public service. Let's examine how profitable that service has been. He held up a document. According to Open Secrets, which compiles data from mandatory financial disclosures, your net worth in 2009 was $58 million, already making you one of the wealthiest members of Congress. Another document. By 2014, just 5 years later, your net worth had nearly doubled to $101 million. By 2018, it reached $114 million. By 2021, $120 million. And according to the most recent analysis from multiple sources cross-referencing your financial disclosures, as of 2024, your net worth stands at approximately $264 million. Bongino laid out all the documents in a row, creating a visual timeline. Let's do the mathematics, Mrs. Speaker. In 2009, you were worth $58 million. Today, you're worth $264 million. That's an increase of $206 million over 15 years. He picked up a calculator, making a show of entering numbers. Your congressional salary during those 15 years, assuming the standard salary, and then leadership bonuses, approximately $3.35 million total. Before taxes. He looked directly at Pelosi. Where did the other $202.65 million come from? The question hung in the air. Several committee members leaned forward. Even some Democrats looked curious about the answer. Now you'll say it came from investments, Bongino continued, and you'd be partially correct. So let's examine those investments. Let's start with real estate because that's easier to track than stocks. He pulled out property records assessor's documents, public filings. You and your husband own an extensive real estate portfolio, currently valued at approximately $45 to $50 million. Let me detail these holdings. Bongino displayed a photograph taken from Google Street View of a red brick mansion. Pacific Heights, San Francisco. You purchased this property in 2007 for $2.25 million. It's registered to the Paul Pelosi Family Trust. According to San Francisco property assessor records and your own financial disclosures, this property is now valued between $10 and $20 million. Beautiful home, Bongino said. Built in 1938, over 300 square feet, in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in America. He moved to the next photograph, an aerial view of a sprawling vineyard estate. Napa Valley Vineyard and Estate, purchased in 1990 for $2.35 million. Current value, according to your disclosures, at least $5 million, though independent real estate experts suggest it could be worth significantly more. This property is particularly interesting, Bongino noted. It's 1,655 acres, includes a 314 square foot main house, plus a 400 square foot addition added in 2006. Has a tennis court swimming pool. Your financial disclosures note it generates at least $5,000 per year in grape sales. Neighbors report you host lavish parties when you're in residence. He displayed more documents. You also own a Georgetown condominium in Washington, D.C., valued in the millions, and 2 commercial buildings in San Francisco, each valued between $5 and $25 million, according to your disclosure, ranges generating between $15,000 and $50,000 per year in rental income. Bongino stepped back, gesturing to all the property documents spread before him. That's approximately $50 million in real estate. On a congressional salary, that totals $8. $3 million over your entire career. Before taxes, before living expenses, before everything else. He looked at Pelosi. So my first question, Mrs. Speaker, how did you purchase $50 million worth of real estate on a government salary that wouldn't cover even one of these properties? Pelosi leaned toward her microphone. My husband is a successful businessman. Yes, let's discuss your husband, Bongino interrupted smoothly. Paul Pelosi, owner of Financial Leasing Services, Inc., a venture capital and financial consulting firm, and a stock trader, a remarkably successful stock trader. He pulled out a new stack of documents, these ones covered in numbers, stock symbols, dates. According to your mandatory financial disclosures, your joint stock portfolio is currently valued at over $130 million. Let me list your major holdings. Bongino read from the document. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, Meta, formerly Facebook, Nvidia, Disney, Comcast, Visa. The portfolio reads like a list of America's most successful technology and media companies. Now, there's nothing illegal about owning stocks, Bongino said. But the performance of this portfolio is what's remarkable. He held up a chart he'd created. In 2023, your portfolio returned approximately 54%. For context, the S&P 500, the benchmark index of America's 500 largest companies, returned 25% that year. You didn't just beat the market, Mrs. Speaker. You crushed it. You outperformed professional hedge fund managers with teams of analysts, advanced algorithms, and billions in resources. In fact, Bongino continued pulling out a printout of social media posts. Your stock trading has become so legendary that a Twitter account called Nancy Pelosi Stock Tracker has over 500,000 followers. People literally track your financial disclosures and copy your trades because your picks are so consistently profitable. There are investment websites dedicated to following the Pelosi portfolio. You've become a meme in investor circles, Mrs. Speaker. He let that sink in before continuing. So we're faced with two possibilities. Either your husband Paul is the greatest stock picker in Wall Street history, with better performance than legendary investors like Warren Buffett, or, he paused, he's trading on information that isn't available to the public. My husband doesn't, Pelosi started. Let me ask you directly, Mrs. Speaker. Bongino interrupted, his voice firm. As a member of Congress, do you receive classified briefings on national security, economic policy, regulatory actions, and government contracts? Pelosi hesitated. Members of Congress receive briefings on relevant matters. Yes or no, Mrs. Speaker? Do you receive information in your official capacity that is not available to the public? Yes, but I don't discuss. And you and your husband file joint tax returns, correct? You share financial accounts. You benefit from every dollar of profit his trades generate. That's a legal arrangement. I'm not questioning the legality of joint tax returns, Mrs. Speaker. I'm establishing that you directly benefit financially from your husband's stock trades. When his trades profit, you profit. Correct? Yes, but... Thank you. Bongino cut her off and pulled out more documents. Now let's examine the timing of these trades. Because in my experience, investigating financial fraud, timing is everything. Suspicious timing transactions that occur right before major market-moving events, that's the red flag that indicates insider trading. He arranged documents showing a timeline. Let's look at some specific examples, Mrs. Speaker. Let's see if patterns emerge. Nancy Pelosi sat rigid in her seat. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Around the room, members of both parties watched with rapt attention. Even Democrats who'd initially seemed ready to defend Pelosi now looked uncertain. The evidence being presented wasn't speculation or partisan attacks. It was documented with official government records, public disclosures, and market data. Chairman McHenry glanced at the clock. Mr. Bongino, how much time do you need? As much as the committee will grant me, Mr. Chairman, Bongino replied. Because we're just getting started. Dan Bongino pulled out what appeared to be a professionally made timeline chart, complete with dates, stock transactions, and corresponding government actions. He propped it against the document stand, where everyone in the room could see it clearly. In forensic financial investigations, Bongino began, we look for patterns. Isolated suspicious transactions can be coincidence. But when you see repeated instances of trades occurring right before major market-moving events, that's a pattern. That's evidence of insider knowledge. He pointed to the first entry on his timeline. Let's start with what I call the NVIDIA fortune, June and July 2022. According to your financial disclosure filed July 15, 2022. Bongino held up the document. Paul Pelosi purchased call options on NVIDIA stock. For those unfamiliar with financial terminology, call options give you the right to purchase stock at a set price. It's a way to amplify gains when you're confident a stock will rise. The disclosure shows the value of this transaction as between $1 million and $5 million. He moved to the next point on his timeline. The CHIPS and Science Act, a bill providing $52 billion in subsidies to semiconductor manufacturing companies, was being debated in Congress at this exact time. The House was scheduled to vote on it in late July 2022. Bongino's voice hardened. NVIDIA, Mrs. Speaker, is one of the largest beneficiaries of semiconductor subsidies. When this bill passed, NVIDIA would receive massive government support for chip development and manufacturing. So let me establish the timeline clearly, Bongino said, pointing to each date on his chart. Early July 2022, Paul Pelosi buys NVIDIA options worth millions. Mid-July 2022, media outlets report on his purchase, causing immediate controversy. Late July 2022, the House is scheduled to vote on the CHIPS Act. He pulled out newspaper clippings, printouts of articles. The timing sparked such intense scrutiny that your office was forced to respond. Let me read from your spokesperson's statement. Speaker Pelosi does not own any stocks and has no prior knowledge or subsequent involvement in any transactions. Technically true, Bongino said, looking at Pelosi. You don't own the stocks, your husband does. Very convenient phrasing. But here's what happened next, he continued, pointing to his timeline. On July 26, 2022, just days before the House vote, Paul Pelosi sold all 25,000 NVIDIA shares at a loss. Your spokesperson claimed this was to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Bongino set down the document and looked directly at the committee. Let's think about that. Paul Pelosi sold at a loss of approximately $341,000 right before the CHIPS Act vote. Why would he do that if the trade wasn't suspicious? If the timing was just coincidence, why sell at a loss? He pulled out a chart showing NVIDIA's stock performance. Here's what makes this even more interesting. After Paul sold those shares, NVIDIA's stock surged by over 200%. If he'd held them, the original stake would be worth over $12 million today. But he sold at a loss. The one time that public scrutiny forced Paul Pelosi to exit a trade early, he lost money. Every other time when there's no scrutiny, the trades are incredibly profitable. What does that tell us? Bongino asked rhetorically. It tells us that even you recognized the timing was suspicious. So suspicious that you were willing to take a loss rather than face the political consequences. He moved to the next section of his timeline. Case number 2, the Visa dump. This is more recent, and in my opinion even more damning. According to your periodic transaction report filed in July 2024, Bongino held up another official disclosure. Paul Pelosi sold 2,000 shares of Visa stock. The value listed in the disclosure ranges from $500,000 to $1 million. Let's call it approximately $526,000 based on Visa's stock price at the time. Now watch what happens, Bongino said, building tension. On September 24, 2024, the Department of Justice filed a civil antitrust lawsuit against Visa. The lawsuit alleges that Visa illegally monopolized the debit card market, paid rivals to stay out of the market, and engaged in anti-competitive conduct. This is a massive lawsuit that could fundamentally reshape Visa's business model. He displayed a chart showing Visa's stock price. When the lawsuit was announced, Visa's stock immediately dropped 5%. That's billions in market capitalization wiped out in hours. Bongino looked at his timeline. Paul Pelosi sold in July. The lawsuit was announced in September. That's a gap of about 2 months. Now, Mrs. Speaker, let me ask you some questions. He held up his hand, counting on his fingers. How did Paul know to sell Visa shares 2 months before a Department of Justice lawsuit was announced? Who told him that a major antitrust action was coming? Did you attend any classified briefings about DOJ investigations into major corporations? Did you receive any information in your official capacity about pending regulatory or legal actions against companies your husband held stock in? Pelosi tried to respond. My spokesperson already stated that I have no involvement. Your spokesperson says you don't own stocks, Bongino interrupted. That's technically true, but you file joint tax returns with your husband. You share financial accounts. You benefit from every dollar of profit. When I investigated fraud schemes in the Secret Service, we called this beneficial ownership. The legal arrangement might put the stocks in your husband's name, but you benefit equally from the profits. He pulled out more documents. But let's continue because the pattern gets clearer with more examples. Case 3. The Microsoft Mystery. March 2021. Bongino displayed another transaction record. Paul Pelosi purchased Microsoft call options. 12 days later, exactly 12 days, Microsoft was awarded a $22 billion contract by the U.S. Army to supply augmented reality headsets to combat troops. Microsoft stock surged 11% on the announcement, Bongino said. Paul Pelosi's options became significantly more valuable. Remarkable timing, wouldn't you say? He didn't wait for an answer. Now, military contracts of this magnitude are discussed in classified congressional briefings long before they're publicly announced. The House Armed Services Committee Intelligence Committees, they receive detailed information about major defense contracts. Did you receive such briefings, Mrs. Speaker? Case 4. The Tesla Transition. Bongino pulled out another disclosure. December 2020. Paul Pelosi purchases between $500,000 and $1 million in Tesla stock. 1 month later, January 2021, President Biden announces that the federal government will transition its entire fleet of vehicles to electric vehicles. This includes 225,000 U.S. Postal Service vehicles. Tesla is one of the major beneficiaries of this policy shift. Tesla's stock price surges, Bongino said, showing the chart. Paul Pelosi's December purchase grows substantially in value. Again, remarkable timing. President Biden's transition team was discussing this policy for months before the public announcement. Were you in meetings where this was discussed, Mrs. Speaker? Bongino stepped back, surveying all the evidence he'd laid out. These aren't isolated incidents. This is a pattern. Purchase right before positive news. Sell right before negative news. Timing that consistently beats professional investors. He looked directly at Pelosi. In my 12 years investigating financial crimes, I learned that innocent people can explain coincidences. They provide evidence that refutes suspicions. Guilty people deflect. They attack the investigator. They claim they're victims of partisan attacks. They hide behind spokespersons who issue carefully worded denials. So let me ask you directly, Mrs. Speaker, under oath and on national television. Have you ever shared information you learned in classified congressional briefings with your husband? Have you ever discussed upcoming legislation, pending regulatory actions, or government contract decisions with your husband before that information was made public? The question hung in the chamber. Every camera focused on Nancy Pelosi. She leaned toward her microphone, her voice careful. "I have never violated any law or regulation regarding—" "That's not what I asked." Bongino cut her off. "I didn't ask if you violated laws. I asked if you shared information. Because here's the thing, Mrs. Speaker, until 2012, it actually wasn't clearly illegal for members of Congress to trade on inside information. The Stock Act passed in 2012 was designed to close that loophole. But even that law has massive enforcement problems." He pulled out a thick report. According to multiple investigations, including a Business Insider analysis, over 70 members of Congress have violated the Stock Act's reporting requirements. The maximum fine, $200. That's it. $200 for violations that can net millions in profits. "The system is designed to allow this," Bongino said, his voice rising with frustration. "Members of Congress receive classified information about pending legislation, regulations, and government actions. They can share this information with spouses. Their spouses can trade on it. If they miss reporting deadlines, the fine is trivial, and enforcement is virtually non-existent." He looked around the committee room. But the American people aren't stupid. They see Nancy Pelosi entering Congress with a modest net worth and leaving with $264 million. They see stock trades with perfect timing year after year. They see wealth accumulation that cannot be explained by congressional salaries. And they're tired of it. "Mrs. Speaker," Bongino said, gathering his timeline documents, "you called me unqualified to testify about congressional ethics. But I've just presented documented evidence of a systematic pattern that any fraud investigator would immediately flag as suspicious. The timing is too perfect. The profits are too consistent. The pattern is too clear. You owe the American people an explanation, not a spokesperson statement, not a dismissal of concerns, a real explanation. How did your husband consistently make trades right before market-moving events? Where did the information come from? How did you accumulate $264 million on a government salary?" Nancy Pelosi sat silent, her face showing the strain of someone who'd badly miscalculated. She'd attacked Bongino's credibility, thinking it would end the conversation. Instead, she'd opened the door to the most comprehensive public exposure of congressional stock trading corruption in modern history. And Bongino wasn't finished. Not even close. Dan Bongino organized a new section of his materials. These documents included photographs, news articles, and what appeared to be social media printouts. His tone shifted, slightly less forensic accountant and more cultural critic. "Mrs. Speaker, let's discuss lifestyle," Bongino began. "Because wealth accumulation is one thing. But how you live while accumulating that wealth, while preaching about inequality and advocating for higher taxes on the wealthy, that reveals character." He held up a photograph blown up to poster size for the room to see clearly. It showed a gleaming modern kitchen with two massive refrigerators side by side. "April 2020, Bongino said. The COVID-19 pandemic is devastating America. Unemployment hits levels not seen since the Great Depression. Small businesses are closing by the thousands. Americans are lining up at food banks in numbers that shock even seasoned relief workers. Fear, uncertainty, economic collapse." He paused for effect. "And on April 13, 2020, you appeared on The Late Late Show with James Corden. You gave a video tour of your kitchen, and you showed off your two Sub-Zero refrigerators. Combined cost $24,000. $24,000 for refrigerators." Bongino displayed another image, a close-up of the refrigerator's interior. "And what did you have in these $24,000 refrigerators? Premium ice cream. You specifically mentioned Genie's Splendid ice creams, which costs about $13 per pint. You talked about your collection of gourmet ice cream while Americans worried about affording basic groceries." He set down the photographs and looked at Pelosi. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Even liberal commentators criticized what they called your let them eat ice cream moment. Social media exploded with anger. But your office never apologized, never acknowledged how tone-deaf it appeared. That's not an isolated incident, Bongino continued. Let's look at another example from the pandemic. He displayed security camera footage stills. September 1st, 2020. San Francisco is under strict COVID lockdown. Hair salons are closed for indoor services. Small salon owners are struggling, some going out of business entirely. The city you represent is suffering under restrictions that you and other Democrats support. And where are you? Bongino pointed at the image. Inside E-Salon in San Francisco, getting your hair blown out. Security footage obtained by Fox News shows you walking through the salon without a mask, receiving services that were prohibited for everyone else under the lockdown orders. He pulled out news article printouts. When this footage leaked, you didn't apologize. You claimed you were set up by the salon owner. You said it was a setup. You blamed the salon owner for exposing you. Bongino's voice rose with controlled anger. Small business owners were losing their livelihoods because of lockdowns you supported. But you got special treatment. You got your hair done. And when you were caught, you blamed the person who exposed your hypocrisy rather than apologizing to the salon owners who couldn't operate legally. He moved to another set of documents. Let's discuss your use of military aircraft. As Speaker of the House, you have access to military flights for security reasons. That's standard for the position. But your specific aircraft requests became controversial. Bongino read from a Judicial Watch report based on FOIA requests. Multiple reports documented your requests for luxury military aircraft with specific amenities. In one notable case, you requested a C-32, a military version of a Boeing 757, for travel between Washington and San Francisco. The Defense Department estimated the cost to taxpayers for these flights at approximately $2 million per year. There's nothing illegal about this, Bongino acknowledged. You were Speaker. Security protocols apply. But the optics matter. You're using taxpayer-funded luxury aircraft while lecturing Americans about carbon emissions and climate change. He pulled out more photographs. Let's talk about your residences. You own at least 3 luxury properties. The Pacific Heights mansion worth $10 to $20 million. The Napa Valley Vineyard estate worth at least $5 million. The Georgetown condo in one of Washington's most exclusive neighborhoods. Your Napa property is particularly interesting, Bongino said, displaying aerial photographs. Neighbors report that when you're in residence, there are gaggles of black SUVs and increased air traffic. You host parties for major donors, political allies, wealthy supporters. One neighbor described it as, "No missing her when she's in town." He set down the photographs. Now contrast that with your political messaging. You advocate for higher taxes on the wealthy. You support policies to address income inequality. You position yourself as a champion of the working class. But Mrs. Speaker, Bongino said, looking directly at Pelosi, you are the wealthy. You're worth $264 million. You're in the top 0.01% of Americans. You live in luxury homes, fly on military aircraft stock, $24,000 refrigerators with $13 pints of ice cream, and get special treatment during lockdowns. The disconnect is staggering, he continued. You preach about inequality while living a lifestyle that 99.99% of Americans will never experience. You advocate for taxing the rich while using every legal mechanism to grow your own wealth. You support lockdowns for small businesses while getting private salon appointments. Bongino pulled out his timeline again. But here's what makes it worse. You're not just wealthy. You're getting wealthier every single year. Your net worth in 2009, $58 million. Today, $264 million. That's a $206 million increase during a period when median household income in America barely budged. While you were getting richer through suspiciously timed stock trades, Bongino said, his voice heavy with implication. The Americans you claim to represent were struggling. The pandemic devastated working families. Small businesses closed permanently. Yet your wealth continued to grow. He held up a chart showing the wealth gap. Income inequality, which you frequently cite as a crisis, has grown substantially during your time in Congress. The wealthy have gotten wealthier. The middle class has stagnated. And you, Mrs. Speaker, have personally exemplified this trend. You've accumulated a fortune while in office, claiming to fight against the accumulation of fortunes. That's not public service, Bongino said flatly. That's profiteering. That's using public office for private gain. That's exactly the kind of corruption the founders feared when they designed our system of government. He gathered the lifestyle documents into a pile. You called me unqualified to testify about ethics. But I see the ethics problem clearly. It's sitting right there in your seat. It's the politician worth $264 million lecturing working Americans about fairness. It's the luxury property owner advocating for wealth redistribution. It's the insider trader wrapped in the costume of a progressive champion. Nancy Pelosi's face had gone from pale to flushed. She gripped the edge of the table before her, clearly fighting to maintain composure. Several Democratic committee members looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, avoiding eye contact with their former speaker. But we're not done, Bongino said, pulling out yet another folder. Because there's one more thing we need to discuss. We need to talk about how you've been protected from scrutiny for 37 years. We need to talk about the system that shields politicians like you from accountability. Dan Bongino's tone shifted again, becoming more analytical, almost academic. He pulled out what appeared to be a family tree diagram. Mrs. Speaker, let's discuss your background, he began, because understanding where you came from helps explain how you've maintained power for so long. He displayed the diagram. You were born Nancy Patricia D'Alessandro on March 26, 1940, in Baltimore, Maryland. Your father was Thomas D'Alessandro, Jr. At the time of your birth, he was serving as a U.S. congressman from Maryland. He later served as mayor of Baltimore for 3 terms. Your brother Thomas D'Alessandro III also served as mayor of Baltimore from 1967 to 1971. Bongino continued, pointing to the family tree. Your family has been in politics for 3 generations. You didn't rise from obscurity. You were born into a political dynasty. He set down the diagram. There's nothing wrong with political families. The Kennedys, the Bushes, the Clintons. American politics has always had dynasties. But it matters when we discuss your narrative. You campaign as a champion of regular people, but you were raised in the corridors of power. Your father was a congressman when you were born. You grew up surrounded by politics, fundraising, power brokering. You're not self-made, Bongino said bluntly. You inherited a political network, a fundraising base, and name recognition. That gave you advantages most aspiring politicians never have. He pulled out electoral records. You first won your congressional seat in a June 1987 special election. And since then, you've never faced a serious challenge. Let me show you your electoral history. Bongino displayed a chart. 1988, 76% of the vote. 1990, 77%. 1992 through 2020 never dropped below 80% except for 3 elections. Your district is so safely Democratic, so heavily gerrymandered in your favor, that you face no real electoral accountability. A safe seat means freedom, Bongino explained. Freedom to accumulate wealth without fear of voters punishing you. Freedom to make suspiciously timed stock trades without political consequences. Freedom to live a lifestyle disconnected from your constituents without losing elections. He moved to another set of documents. But electoral safety is only part of your protection. Let's talk about the power structure you've built within Congress and the Democratic Party. You served as House Minority Whip, House Minority Leader, and twice as Speaker of the House, Bongino said. You controlled committee assignments. You controlled which bills came to the floor. You controlled the Democratic fundraising apparatus. According to various sources, you raised over $400 million for Democratic campaigns during your leadership tenure. That's power, he said simply. Real power. The power to make or break political careers. Members who challenged you found themselves without good committee assignments, without fundraising support, without leadership positions. Members who supported you were rewarded. Bongino displayed news articles about various political incidents. When questions arose about your stock-trading Democratic leadership, defended you. When ethics concerns were raised, your allies dismissed them as partisan attacks. When journalists tried to investigate, they faced resistance from your powerful network of supporters. You've been protected, Bongino said, by the same power structure that benefits from your fundraising prowess and political connections. It's a mutual protection racket. You protect them, they protect you. He pulled out a compilation of media coverage. And then there's the media protection. Look at how mainstream outlets have covered you versus how they cover Republicans accused of similar conduct. When Republicans are accused of insider trading, and they should be investigated too, it's front-page news, Bongino said. Major investigations calls for prosecution extensive coverage. But when your stock trading patterns emerged, what happened? A few articles, some online coverage. But mostly the story died. It didn't become a scandal. It didn't lead to investigations. Why? He asked rhetorically. Because you're protected by your party, by your power, and by media outlets that see you as a bulwark against Republicans. They won't seriously investigate you because damaging you might help Republicans. Bongino's voice took on an edge. But that's not journalism. That's not accountability. That's access journalism. That's political tribalism. That's the death of the watchdog function of the press. He set down the media compilation and looked around the room. Mrs. Speaker, you've served 37 years in Congress. In that time, have you ever faced a serious ethics investigation? Has the House Ethics Committee ever sanctioned you? Has the SEC ever investigated your husband's trading patterns? Has any law enforcement agency ever opened a probe into your wealth accumulation? He paused. The answer is no, despite $264 million in wealth on a government salary, despite stock trades with remarkably suspicious timing, despite patterns that would trigger immediate investigation if done by a private citizen. You've never faced real accountability. That's not because you've done nothing wrong, Bongino said. It's because you're protected. Protected by power. Protected by party. Protected by a system that investigates itself and finds no wrongdoing. He pulled out his final documents. But I think that era is ending. Americans are tired of politicians getting rich while they struggle. They're tired of obvious corruption being ignored. They're tired of a two-tier system where regular citizens face harsh penalties for insider trading, while members of Congress face nothing. The Nancy Pelosi stock tracker with 500,000 followers represents something important, Bongino said. It represents citizens doing the work that law enforcement won't do, monitoring your trades, documenting the patterns, holding you accountable through public scrutiny, even if legal accountability never comes. He looked directly at Pelosi. You've gotten away with it for 37 years. But the protection is crumbling. The evidence is public. The patterns are undeniable. And people like me, people with training in fraud investigation, people willing to compile the evidence and present it, we're not going away. Your attack on my credibility today was supposed to silence another critic, Bongino said. Instead, you gave me the platform to expose everything. That was your mistake, Mrs. Speaker, a fatal mistake. Dan Bongino stood gathering all his documents, organizing them into neat stacks. The hearing had been going for nearly 4 hours. Every major news network had stayed with it, canceling regular programming. Social media was exploding. The room remained packed, no one leaving despite the length. Let me summarize what we've documented here today. Bongino began his voice carrying the authority of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. Using the same forensic techniques I employed investigating financial crimes in the Secret Service, I've presented evidence of a systematic pattern that demands investigation. He held up one stack of papers. Financial impossibility. You've earned $8.3 million in congressional salary over 37 years. Your net worth is $264 million. The difference, $255.7 million, allegedly came from stock market investments and real estate appreciation. Another stack. Suspicious trading patterns. Multiple documented instances of stock purchases right before positive market-moving events. Multiple sales right before negative events. Performance that exceeds professional investors. Timing that suggests access to non-public information. Another stack. Lifestyle disconnect. You live in $50 million worth of real estate. You show off $24,000 refrigerators. You get private salon appointments during lockdowns. Yet you position yourself as a champion of working people and advocate for policies targeting the wealthy. The final stack. Systemic protection. 37 years without serious investigation despite obvious red flags. Protected by political power, party loyalty, and media favoritism. A safe electoral seat that removes accountability through democratic processes. Bongino set down all the papers and looked at the committee, then at the cameras, then finally at Nancy Pelosi. This isn't about partisan politics, he said firmly. Republicans who engage in insider trading should face the same scrutiny. I've criticized members of both parties for corruption. But today, Mrs. Speaker, you made this personal. You attacked my credibility. You tried to have me removed from testifying. You thought your power and your position would protect you. You were wrong. He picked up his folders. I'm calling on this committee to take the following actions. First, refer this matter to the Securities and Exchange Commission for a full investigation into potential insider trading. The patterns I've documented today meet every standard for suspicious activity that I learned in federal law enforcement. Second, refer this matter to the House Ethics Committee for a comprehensive investigation into wealth accumulation while in office. How does a member of Congress acquire $264 million? That question deserves an answer. Third, support and pass legislation banning members of Congress and their immediate families from trading individual stocks. Senator Josh Hawley's bill, ironically acronymed the Pelosi Act, would be a good start. Members should be limited to broad-based index funds and mutual funds. No individual stock picking. No using inside information for personal gain. Fourth, strengthen enforcement of the Stock Act. The current $200 fine for reporting violations is a joke. Make the penalties meaningful. Make the reporting requirements real-time. Make the punishment fit the crime. Fifth, require members of Congress to place assets in blind trusts. If you want to serve the public, truly serve the public, not your investment portfolio. Chairman McHenry nodded slowly. The committee will take your recommendations under advisement, Mr. Bongino. Bongino turned to face Nancy Pelosi directly. Mrs. Speaker, you have the opportunity right now to respond. You can provide evidence that refutes what I've presented. You can explain the suspicious timing. You can account for $264 million in wealth on a government salary. You can address the American people directly. Or you can do what you've done for 37 years, dismiss the questions, attack the questioner, and rely on your power to protect you. The chamber fell silent. Every camera focused on Nancy Pelosi. She sat rigid in her chair, her hands gripping the table's edge. Her face showed the strain of someone who'd been systematically dismantled in public. She leaned toward her microphone. Her voice, when it came, lacked the commanding presence she'd displayed at the hearing's start. "These are partisan attacks designed to distract from evidence, Mrs. Speaker," Bongino interrupted. "Not accusations of partisanship. Evidence. I've presented documents, official records, timelines, financial analysis. You can refute it with evidence, or you can deflect with accusations. But the American people are watching. They'll judge which approach suggests innocence and which suggests guilt." Pelosi's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at her colleagues as if seeking support, but found mostly uncomfortable expressions. Even longtime allies seemed unwilling to jump to her defense in the face of the documented evidence. She started, then stopped. "My financial disclosures are public record. Everything I've done is legal." "Legal and ethical are not the same thing," Bongino said. "It may be technically legal for members of Congress to trade stocks based on information from classified briefings. The enforcement is weak. The penalties are trivial. But that doesn't make it ethical. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it what the American people expect from their representatives." He picked up his final folder. "Mrs. Speaker, you've been in Congress since 1987. You've seen the Soviet Union fall, the rise of China, 9/11, multiple wars, financial crises, a pandemic. You've wielded enormous power. You've shaped policy. You've influenced history. But your legacy," Bongino said quietly, "will be defined by this: a politician who entered office with modest means and left with a fortune. A public servant who lived like aristocracy. A lawmaker who used her position to enrich herself while preaching about inequality. That's not the legacy of a statesman. That's the legacy of a corrupt politician who got away with it for decades until someone finally had the evidence and the courage to expose it." The room remained silent for a long moment. Then Chairman McHenry gavelled, "This hearing will recess while the committee considers the serious allegations raised today. Mrs. Pelosi, you may submit written responses. Mr. Bongino, thank you for your testimony." As the gavel came down, cameras captured the scene: Dan Bongino gathering his materials with calm professionalism, having delivered perhaps the most comprehensive exposure of congressional corruption in modern history. And Nancy Pelosi, sitting alone at the committee table, the powerful political force who'd commanded respect and fear for decades, now looking diminished and defensive. The Queen of Congress had been exposed. The $264 million question had been asked publicly with evidence on national television. Whether legal accountability would follow remained uncertain. But political accountability had arrived. 4 months after Dan Bongino's testimony, the political landscape had transformed in ways that few could have predicted, but that would reshape American politics for years to come. The hearing footage had been viewed over 400 million times across all platforms. It remained the most watched congressional testimony since the Supreme Court confirmation hearings. But unlike those partisan battles, the Bongino-Pelosi confrontation cut across traditional political divides. Conservatives celebrated the exposure of Democratic corruption. But progressives, frustrated by establishment politics, also found themselves questioning how Pelosi had accumulated such wealth. The hashtag Pelosi portfolio became and remained a trending topic. Financial websites continued publishing daily updates on Pelosi's disclosed trades. The Nancy Pelosi stock tracker gained over 2 million followers. Young investors on Reddit and other platforms openly discussed copying her trades, creating what became known as the Pelosi ETF, an unofficial portfolio mirroring her holdings. But more significantly, the hearing had sparked institutional responses that career politicians feared. The Securities and Exchange Commission, under pressure from both political parties and facing public outcry, announced a preliminary review of trading patterns by members of Congress and their immediate families. While carefully noting they couldn't confirm investigations SEC officials, speaking anonymously to media outlets, indicated that suspicious trading patterns involving legislative or regulatory actions were being examined with new scrutiny. The House Ethics Committee, historically known for protecting members rather than sanctioning them, faced a crisis of credibility. Under bipartisan pressure, they announced a comprehensive review of Pelosi's financial disclosures. The review was ongoing, but the mere fact of its existence marked a significant change. Nancy Pelosi, one of the most powerful politicians in America, was under official investigation. More dramatically, the political momentum for banning congressional stock trading reached critical mass. Senator Josh Hawley's Pelosi Act, which had languished for years, suddenly gained 47 co-sponsors, including 12 Democrats, who could no longer afford to oppose reform. The bill prohibited members of Congress and their spouses from trading individual stocks, limiting investments to broad-based index funds, mutual funds, and treasury bonds. In a remarkable turn, Nancy Pelosi herself announced support for the legislation. Her spokesperson issued a carefully worded statement. Representative Pelosi has always believed in the highest ethical standards. She supports comprehensive reform of congressional trading rules and looks forward to voting for legislation that ensures public confidence. The statement fooled no one. Political analysts immediately recognized it as damage control, a belated attempt to get ahead of an issue that had destroyed her public image. The irony that reform legislation bore her name as its acronym, Preventing Elected Leaders from Owning Securities and Investments Act, was not lost on anyone. But the most significant consequence was personal and political. In a private meeting with Democratic leadership, details of which leaked immediately to Politico, Pelosi announced she would not seek any leadership position in the next Congress. After 20 years leading House Democrats, her tenure was ending not with celebration, but with quiet dismissal. Passing the torch to a new generation, her official statement read. But everyone understood the truth she'd been forced out. Her exposure had made her toxic. Democratic members facing tough re-elections didn't want to answer questions about why they'd defended Pelosi's trading. Progressive challengers in primaries were already using the Pelosi portfolio as evidence that the Democratic establishment was corrupt. The 2024 election cycle proved transformative. For the first time since 1987, Pelosi faced a serious primary challenge. A 38-year-old progressive Democrat named Joshua Ramirez ran explicitly on ending the era of millionaire politicians enriching themselves in office. His ads featured clips from Bongino's testimony. His fundraising emails referenced the $264 million question. Polls showed the race competitive. Pelosi, who'd won her last primary with 75% of the vote, was polling at 51%. She was forced to actually campaign in her own district for the first time in decades. She spent millions defending a seat that had been safe for 37 years. The national implications extended beyond one district. Congressional stock trading became a defining issue in races across the country. Progressive challengers used it against establishment incumbents in Democratic primaries. Republicans used it against Democrats in general elections. Even some vulnerable Republicans faced primary challenges from opponents attacking their trading records. A Pew Research poll found that 76% of Americans, including majorities of both Democrats and Republicans, supported banning congressional stock trading. It was one of the few issues with bipartisan public support. Politicians who opposed the ban were asked a simple question: why should members of Congress be allowed to profit from inside information that would send regular citizens to prison? For Dan Bongino, the aftermath elevated him from prominent conservative commentator to something approaching political icon status. His podcast became the #1 ranked political podcast in America, surpassing even Joe Rogan's show in the politics category. He signed a reported $15 million book deal for The Corruption Playbook: How Politicians Get Rich While You Get Screwed. Speaking invitations flooded in from across the political spectrum. Conservative groups celebrated him as a hero who'd exposed Democratic corruption. But he also received invitations from progressive organizations frustrated with establishment politics. His message that corruption exists on both sides, that evidence matters more than partisanship, that politicians shouldn't get rich in office, resonated across traditional political divides. More importantly, Bongino's testimony created a template. Within weeks, similar evidence compilations appeared online, targeting other politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, whose wealth accumulation raised questions. Former federal investigators, forensic accountants, and citizen journalists began applying Bongino's methodological approach, compile public records, document patterns, present evidence systematically. A loosely organized movement emerged calling itself Congressional Accountability Project. Volunteers tracked financial disclosures, compared them with legislative actions, identified suspicious patterns, and published their findings online. They went after Republicans and Democrats, equally earning credibility through their nonpartisan approach. Several members of Congress found themselves under new scrutiny. A Republican senator who'd made millions trading healthcare stocks while serving on the committee overseeing healthcare policy faced investigation. A Democratic representative whose husband's construction company received government contracts worth tens of millions faced ethics complaints. The era of consequence-free corruption was ending. Media coverage shifted noticeably. Mainstream outlets, embarrassed by their years of ignoring the Pelosi portfolio story, began dedicating resources to investigating congressional finances. The Washington Post created a congressional trading desk that published weekly analyses of member trades. The New York Times launched a Wealth in Office database tracking every member's net worth changes. Conservative media, vindicated by Bongino's exposure, ran endless segments on congressional corruption. But they faced their own reckoning when Republican trading patterns underwent similar scrutiny. The Congressional Accountability Project's nonpartisan approach forced conservative outlets to cover Republican corruption as well, or lose credibility. 4 months after the hearing, Nancy Pelosi remained in Congress, but diminished. She rarely appeared on television anymore. Her social media presence, once active and defiant, became sporadic and defensive. Colleagues who'd once sought her advice now kept careful distance. The woman who'd been the face of Democratic Party power for 2 decades was effectively sidelined. Her husband Paul stopped trading individual stocks, entirely moving their entire portfolio to index funds. The Nancy Pelosi Stock Tracker account posted a final message: "Mission accomplished. Paul Pelosi exits all individual stock positions. Congressional reform passing. Accountability won." Then the account went dormant, its work complete. In San Francisco, the city Pelosi had represented for 37 years, opinion remained divided. Older Democrats defended her legacy, pointing to her legislative accomplishments, her barrier-breaking role as the first female speaker. Younger progressives saw her as emblematic of everything wrong with establishment politics, out of touch, enriching herself, protecting the status quo. The divide reflected a broader generational and ideological split in American politics. The old guard, comfortable with wealthy politicians and corporate influence, defending Pelosi as a victim of partisan attacks. The reform movement, demanding accountability regardless of party, seeing her exposure as long overdue. In a quiet moment captured by a San Francisco Chronicle reporter, Pelosi was asked directly, "Do you regret attacking Dan Bongino that day?" Her response, unguarded in a way rarely seen, revealed the cost of her miscalculation. "I regret giving him the platform." Not regret for the trading, not regret for the wealth accumulation, not regret for the lifestyle disconnect. Just regret for attacking someone who came prepared with evidence. That response, perhaps more than anything else, crystallized why the hearing had resonated so powerfully. It revealed a politician who'd spent decades insulated from accountability, who believed her power made her untouchable, who thought attacking critics would make problems disappear. She'd learned too late that evidence defeats power, that documentation defeats deflection, that someone with training and courage can expose what everyone suspects, but no one dares say. As the epilogue to this story continued to unfold, in real time, one conclusion became unavoidable. American politics had changed. Not overnight, not completely, but meaningfully. The Bongino-Pelosi hearing marked the moment when public anger at congressional corruption found a voice backed by evidence. When someone finally asked the $264 million question and demanded an answer. Whether systemic reform would follow remained uncertain. Whether criminal accountability would occur was doubtful. The system was designed to protect its own, and decades of precedent suggested that politicians rarely face real consequences. But political accountability had arrived. The evidence was public. The patterns were exposed. The protection was broken. And across America, citizens were watching their representatives' financial disclosures with new scrutiny, armed with new tools demanding new standards. Nancy Pelosi's legacy. Whatever her legislative accomplishments would forever include this, she became the face of congressional insider trading. She embodied the corruption that Americans intuitively suspected but rarely saw documented so comprehensively. She represented the old system of politician enrichment that a new generation was determined to end. And it all started because she made one fatal mistake. She attacked a former federal investigator who had the evidence, the platform, and the courage to expose everything. Destroy that like button. If you believe politicians shouldn't become multimillionaires while in office, subscribe, because this is just the beginning. We're going after corrupt politicians on both sides. Share this everywhere. Because the establishment media buried this story for decades. Comment below. Should members of Congress be banned from trading stocks? Should Nancy Pelosi face criminal charges? What politician should be investigated next? This is what happens when someone with forensic training confronts corruption with evidence instead of partisan talking points. This is what happens when facts defeat power. This is what happens when Americans demand accountability from their representatives. The era of consequence-free congressional insider trading is ending. The era of politicians getting rich on government salaries is ending. The era of wealth accumulation without explanation is ending. One investigation at a time. One exposure at a time. One politician at a time. At a time. Nancy Pelosi was just the beginning. The files are ready. The evidence is compiled. Democrats and Republicans, no one is safe from the truth. God bless the investigators who care about evidence more than party. God bless the citizens demanding accountability. God bless everyone who believes that in America, no politician should be above the law. The $264 million question has been asked. The answer was found in official documents, public records, and suspicious patterns that any fraud investigator would immediately flag. The swamp is being drained, one exposure at a time. And it turns out all you need is evidence, courage, and a former federal agent who knows how to build a case.